And if you just start doing those things, and then you're working with the practitioner like Dana, and you're understanding what your microbiome looks like, and you're making other changes to adjust the things that are a bit off in your microbiome, whether it's dietary or lifestyle changes, just adding all of those things together will have a dramatic cumulative effect, right? And that's another point to put across, is that there isn't like a magic bullet when it comes to your microbiome, right? Remember, it's a complex ecosystem. So there has to be a number of inputs that go in to help it improve, right? So you have to do a number of things. And over time, those number of things will accumulate to big changes, not only in your microbiome, but of course in your health. And so you have all of the power within you to make those changes and do those things.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. All I can say is wow. This episode is one not to be missed. Grab those pens and paper because the amount of gold that was dropped in this episode was huge. Boy, does my guest know his stuff. My guest is a research microbiologist and has been involved in the dietary supplement and nutrition market for the past 18 years. He comes from a university research background, having spent several years with hands-on R&D in the fields of molecular medicine and microbiology at the University of Iowa. He established a clinical research organization where he designed and conducted dozens of human clinical trials in human nutrition. He's also the co-founder and partner in New Science Trading. It's a nutritional technology development company, and is also a co-founder and chief scientific officer at Microbiome Labs. He's a frequent lecturer on the human microbiome at medical and nutrition conferences. He is an expert guest on national and satellite radio. He has appeared in several international documentaries and has been a guest speaker on several international health summits as a microbiome expert. He is currently involved in 16 novel human clinical trials on probiotics and the human microbiome. He is also on the scientific advisory board, or a science advisor, for 7 other companies in the industry. All I can say again is wow. Now it's time to welcome Kiran to the Soaring Child. Hi, Kiran. How are you?
Hi, Dana. I'm great. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I have been totally geeking out having you on the podcast. I sent my rep an email a while ago, and you were one of our first people that I wanted to have on as a guest, even though we've now done lots and lots of interviews, but I finally got you on. So I'm really excited about this.
Well, it's an honor. I know Chad had sent the message and I was very excited to do it. Really important topic and really important community that you guys serve. So happy to offer any value I can. So thank you for having me.
Well, I'm definitely going to be picking your brain today for sure. And so we're just going to dive straight in. And I, obviously want to focus on the gut today. Yeah. And for me and the listeners out there, I do talk a lot about the gut-brain connection, but I'd love to hear it from your point of view. So why don't you just, start with the basics? Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that gut-brain connection?
Yeah, and I want to actually take it a step further than calling it a connection, because in fact, when you think about it, the gut and the brain are actually 2 parts of the same system. Mm-hmm. So not only are they connected, absolutely, through a number of mechanisms, and we'll talk about what those are, they're actually the same system. So it's no different than saying both our eyes are connected. They're both part of the same system. They function slightly differently. They do different things in terms of how they perceive vision and what the collated vision looks like to us in our brain. But ultimately, they're part of the same system. So when you look at the embryonic stage of development, the gut and the brain develop from the same part of the embryo. They develop from the same tissue. They get connected through a number of ways. One of the ways is through the neurological system, where the gut is wrapped around with this enteric nervous system. So it's a super dense set of neurons that cover the entire digestive tract, all the way from your mouth to your bottom. And it's the second most dense neurological system next to the brain. It's even more dense than the spinal cord is. So it's thought of as the other brain or second brain, right? Now that neurological system, which are under the control of microbes, is directly connected to the brain through the vagus nerve. But outside of that, there's, of course, the circulatory system, where things that make their way past the gut and through the gut or are produced in the gut make their way to the brain through the circulatory system. We also know that the gut has somewhere around 80% of all of the immune tissue, right? And we know that the brain has its own lymphatic circulation. So through the lymphatic system, via the immune system, the gut can control the brain in a very measurable way. So it's through circulation, through the neurological system, through the immune system, which is through the lymphatic system. All of those highways and mechanisms allow the gut and the brain to constantly be talking to each other, and of course, influencing one another, because again, they're two parts of the same system. Now, here's another really important message to pass on to people. The gut and the brain, of course, need each other, and the gut and the brain support one another in many dynamic ways. But one thing that's really becoming apparent and that we really need to focus on from in utero onwards, is that a dysfunctional gut can become the most toxic thing to your brain, right? So not only is it not supporting the brain in the way that it should, it's actually becoming a toxicity source to the brain, continuously damaging the brain over time. And we can talk about how that happens and what may happen in utero, what may happen in early childhood, and of course, what happens with adults as well moving forward. But that relationship is important to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listeners, this man knows a lot about the gut and the brain, it sounds like today. And I'm so excited to dive into this deeper. So thank you for going back and really detailing that explanation for the listeners. I think that that's super, super helpful. So can we sort of dive into the side of that and talk about that gut-brain connection in relation to ADHD? So, let's explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of that can start in utero, right? So if there are any disruptions in the development, in the neurological development in utero, that can present itself as ADHD. It can present itself as spectrum disorders, or even all the way to learning disabilities and so on, right? So how does the gut impact that in utero? So starting in utero, the gut produces compounds that actually trigger brain development in the fetus. So mom's gut bacteria will put out compounds that are made only by bacteria that she can't get from diet and she can't extract out of food. The compounds like peptidoglycans, these are unique carbohydrate type molecules that certain types of gut bacteria produce. They excrete that into mom's circulatory system. It passes her gut lining, enters into her circulatory system, makes its way past the liver through the portal circulation. And then, as it turns out, the placenta, right, which is kind of the gatekeeper for the baby, has receptors on it for these bacterial compounds. And then they also have transporters that'll transport from the placenta to the baby's brain these microbial compounds, right? And then the baby's brain has receptors to bind these microbial compounds. And when they bind these compounds, here's some of the things that it induces. It induces the formation of the blood-brain barrier. It increases the formation of the corpus callosum. It creates myelination in the central nervous system of the baby, and it drives the development of the brain in general. This is one of the key stimuli to create brain development in the fetus. And when you think about that, it's absolutely mind-boggling that, right? One of the arguably one of the most important things you want to happen to your baby in utero, the appropriate development of the brain, right? We've outsourced a good portion of that to bacteria to conduct for us, to mom's gut bacteria. And the fact that the placenta and the baby's brain has receptors for bacterial byproducts is mind-boggling. But it's absolutely true. And the research is there to substantiate that. So if mom's gut bacteria was not adequate even during gestation, and there weren't enough of these postbiotics being produced, it can compromise the development of the brain in utero itself, right? We also know that moms who are under lots of gestational stress actually have higher risk of having babies with developmental disorders, right? And in fact, one of the developmental disorders like spectrum disorders are related to gestational stress, right? And so gestational stress, and they've done this on animals. Of course, we can't do it on humans, nor should we ever do it on humans. But what they've done in mouse models, for example, as a study, is they take 2 pregnant mice, right? One of those pregnant mice, they induce a lot of stress during gestation. The other one, no stress, normal feeding, normal habitation, and so on. The non-stress mouse will produce most of the offspring, if not all of the offspring, that don't actually display any sort of spectrum disorders, right? But the mouse under stress will produce a percentage of offspring that are exhibiting spectrum disorders. And then they can go one step further. Within a short amount of time, if they remove some of the serum and circulatory material from the stress mom and put it into the babies of the non-stress mom, the babies of the non-stress mom start exhibiting spectrum-like disorders as well, right?
Just it is mind-blowing to be able to even talk about this. I just want to say to listeners out there, I know that all of us as parents, we always carry this stress. Was it something that I did? It was nothing that you guys did that, would have caused this in your child at all. There are so many factors of it. But I think the best thing that we can sort of talk about now is like, okay, we've got these issues. We know there's something going on with the gut. Actually, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll find out, what do we do about it now? But how would a parent know if there is a gut-brain connection issue or it's compromise?
Yeah. And that's absolutely right. So that's a very important point to bring up, right? Because number one, we didn't know most of this till just a few years ago, right? So whatever was occurring during your pregnancy and all that is outside of your control. And the good news here, though, and this is a very important point that I always like to make, is that it's never too late to make significant improvements, right? Just like how changes in the gut, changes in your gut composition can affect the development in your baby's brain early on in utero or even in early stages in life. In that same way, improvements in your gut and improvements in their gut can significantly improve the further development of their brain and the central nervous system. So it's a really important point. So nobody should ever feel hopeless, which is the excitement out of living in this day and age, because we're coming to learn so much more about our biology. And we're also learning that we have so many more components of it that we can control and impact, right, in a positive way. So the question of how would a parent know that their child is having a gut-brain connection issue? At the end of the day, it is very hard to find a brain-related issue or central nervous system-related issue that is not influenced by the gut, right? So you absolutely have to go after the gut, no matter what the central nervous system or brain-related issue is, because it is absolutely going to be a component of the problem, right? And if you don't go after the gut, if you ignore the gut, then more often than not, you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back each time, right? Just even think about the basic nutrition that the brain needs. The brain, pound for pound, needs more calories than any other part of the body, right? The human brain is an incredible machine, an incredible biological machine that requires a very high amount of ATP and very high amount of cellular level energy. And all of the resources for that cellular level energy come from the gut. And the ability to maintain the cellular machinery, the mitochondria, for example, that produce all this energy, require and depend on signals and compounds from the gut. Right. One example of that are a set of compounds called urolithins. Urolithins are really important compounds that help turn over or repair broken down and dying mitochondria, which is, again, the powerhouse of your cells, right? Some of your cells can have upwards of 2 million mitochondria. Some cells can have a couple thousand mitochondria. But at the end of the day, degeneration, whether it's early on in life or later on in life, is defined as a dysfunction within the mitochondria, right? And in order to turn over the mitochondria and improve cellular function, which improves organ function, you need signals like urolithins, and you only get urolithins from gut bacteria, right? You don't get it from food. It comes from gut bacteria, metabolizing things like polyphenols in your diet and producing these critical compounds, right? So you should never ignore the gut as you're looking at improving your child's development, as you're looking at improving your child's cognitive performance, and so on. It's absolutely critical.
So listeners, write that down. Do not ignore the gut. If your child has neurodevelopmental concerns or symptoms, then you need to start with the gut. And that is very much the approach that I take. That is where I start. One of the tests that we do with families is a stool test. So can we just dive a little bit deeper into stool tests? So are all stool tests made equal?
No, absolutely not. Stool testing, people may not realize this, but stool testing is an amazing scientific discovery, right? So think about it this way. In your stool, your fecal matter, out comes trillions of bacteria, but also viruses and fungus, and then also human cells, right? And we have different DNA than microbes do, not to mention all the millions of compounds that are in there from breakdown of food and so on. So it's a very complex biological entity. And then what we're trying to do out of that stool is extract the bacterial or microbial DNA, depending on the test you're doing, but typically just all the microbial DNA, and then reassemble all that microbial DNA to figure out what microbes are living in your stool and thereby in your microbiome, right? So it is the world's most complicated jigsaw puzzle, right? Because you don't just get clean strips of full DNA that just scream out, hey, I am this bacteria, right? No, you get fragments of DNA. And keep in mind, we're talking about 2 million base pairs that come out in thousands of fragments which are among human DNA and other DNA within the system. And we have to take all those pieces and reassemble them in such a way that we know exactly what bacteria that belongs to. Not only that, we also have to know what else is there and in what concentrations, because when you appropriately map the human microbiome using stool testing, you have to understand all the context, right? Because when it comes to the microbiome, it's not just who's there, but who else is there that matters, right? Microbes influence each other's behaviors by their presence. So you could find a pathogen in the gut and go, holy cow, I have a pathogen. That's bad. Well, that's not necessarily bad. It depends on who else is there to control the pathogen and facilitate other functions out of it. So in general, there's older technology called 16S. That doesn't matter what it's called, but 16S technology is kind of a guessing technology where you find certain fragments of the genome, and it's like having 25, 30% of the jigsaw puzzle and then making a guess what the picture may be, right? Versus whole genome sequencing is putting together that entire puzzle and having a clear picture of what exactly that is. And very few companies, if any, are using the whole genome sequencing. We've gone there because that's what we use in research. So we're in our view, that's the tool we need to provide to our practitioners.
Wow. Yes. No, I definitely use your gut test, and it is quite amazing to be able to see it and know that it's right. I've used a number of gut tests over the years, and, we have got back, lots and lots of different parasites and H. pylori, but then when we do it under this technology, it's not there. And that's because it's much, much more accurate. Is there any sort of percentages on accuracy in the old 16S technology versus the whole genome sequencing?
Yeah, some studies have shown that they're as much as 60 to 70% error prone. So, less than 30% accuracy versus this is 99% accurate, right? And then you mentioned something really important about the parasite, the pathogens and parasite part of it. That was actually our biggest impetus for creating this test, because what we started to see happening in the functional medicine world was a overuse of antimicrobials and even antibiotics by prescribing doctors, right? And the reason they do that is because they use these tests that really are built around amplifying pathogens, right, in an unnatural format. So then every test that comes back looks like, holy cow, I'm inundated with pathogens, right? So what am I to do except trying to kill everything, and then hopefully reseed with good stuff later on? But that's just not how the microbial ecosystem works, right? And so the reason why they pop up with all these pathogens and parasites is they use a technique called PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction. PCR, what it does is it finds a fragment of a gene, and you decide what fragment it is. And then it takes that single gene, that single fragment, and amplifies it millions of times, right? And then it allows you to read what that gene was, because now you have millions of copies of it, because it's very hard to find just a single gene in a giant soup of trillions of microbes. And so they create probes for those specific genes to look for them. Now, there's a couple of issues there. Number one is, how accurate are the probes, right? Are they finding just a gene from, say, H. pylori, or do other bacteria have a similar gene that it's also picking up, right? Number two, just because you have a fragment of a gene from an organism doesn't mean that the organism's there and viable, right? There may be remnants, or there may be a tiny amount, few cells of those organisms, and they may release some of that DNA. So you are artificially picking that up and amplifying it as if that's a problem, right? So the part of it that bothers me the most is it's not giving our practitioners, and thereby their patients, an accurate view of what's actually happening in the microbiome. And without that accuracy, you can't help the microbiome, And we talked about earlier how important it is to help and address the microbiome.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think the takeaway from that one is not all stool tests are made equal. So
one more thing I want to point out of that. Certainly lots of consumers have been coming to me, just of what I do on social media and all that. And they send me these reports from the direct consumer tests that they're also doing, right? There's this RNA test out there that's very popular that people are doing. And I can tell you, because I go to a lot of research conferences and I present at research conferences where microbiome researchers are there, that company in particular, many of these consumer direct tests have been lambasted by the research community because they're black box technology. You send in a sample and they have no validation and no disclosure of how they're coming out with the results that they come out with, right? They call it black box technology in the world of science, where it's like the results are too good to be true and they make zero sense, right? There's no science that allows for that interpretation. So if you're listening and you see ads for these things and test your microbiome and this, that, and the other, go with your practitioner, right? Because they have the background to vet these things and really understand them. So don't get suckered into those programs and then they'll alter your diet in crazy ways. And, you'll be taking steps back before you know it.
Now, thank you so much for bringing up that point. I completely agree with you. I actually just watched a show on Netflix. It was, I don't know if it was a real show or it was just a drama, but it was about a company trying to come out with the first finger prick.
Theranos, yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I've seen that. And in fact, a couple of these testing companies are said to be the Theranos of stool testing, because it's all black box technology. Anytime these companies, a Silicon Valley fund funded, and they have these big venture capital groups behind them. You have to be a little cautious because it's purely a money play, right?
Totally.
There's no actual altruism to it. It's all just about the dollars.
Totally. And if you haven't watched that show on Netflix, it's really, really worthwhile. I was a bit addicted to it. And now it's finished. So anyway, moving on. Now we know, okay, if a family works out that their child has gut-brain connection issue, which most of the people listening today probably do have, what should the family do?
Yeah. So there are some basic features of a healthy gut that we have to start to reestablish, right? One of the first ones is the diversity in the gut. Alpha diversity, which is the measure of how many viable species you have within your gut microbiome, is arguably one of the most important functionalities of a healthy gut. Most people that have a dysbiotic gut, which is the vast majority of Americans, because we live where we live in kind of a toxic developed world, right? Will have low levels of alpha diversity. And through our biome effects tests, we're seeing lower and lower alpha diversity over the years, right? Which is quite scary. We work a lot with a couple of researchers that have been working with the nomad tribes or the hunter-gatherer tribes in Tanzania, for example, or in Papua New Guinea in particular. And they've been analyzing the microbiomes now for 6, 7, 8 years and their diet and the impact of all that. In fact, they've been isolating species. These are ancestral species that seem to be extremely important for the microbiome that we've completely lost. They've been isolating those species and studying them, and we're working with them to develop that species. But what we're seeing as a difference in the few hundred years that we've changed the way we live compared to how they currently live is we've lost at least half of our diversity in our microbiome, right? And I want to put this in perspective because people really have to be thinking about this. So the microbiome, your gut microbiome especially, conveys the vast majority of your functionality, right? So the vast majority of the active compounds circulating right now in your body are made by the microbiome, right? Most of your genetic elements come from the microbiome. We have 150 times more genes in our microbes than we do in our own cells, right? So we are essentially a very complex microbial structure, and the microbes dictate function in our body. If we start to lose big groups of microbes, we lose functionality. And if we lose functionality, we're no longer appropriately adapted to live in the world that we live in. So if I told you, based on the choices we make right now, the next generation of kids would be born without a spleen, you would freak out, right? And then if I said, right, and their subsequent generation would be born not only without a spleen, but with one kidney. And they would have to live and figure out how to band-aid themselves through existing in a world without a spleen and with just one kidney, right? That's what's happening now. If we lose the microbes that we continue to lose, we are wholly inadequate to exist in the world that we live in. And that's why we're seeing this significant rise in all of these chronic problems, right?
Yes.
All of the developmental disorders, allergies, asthma. Asthma is an absolute epidemic, right? We're seeing in older people an epidemic of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, heart disease. The pharma companies and medical establishments have been spending billions of dollars over the last 60 years on heart disease, and we haven't made a single blip in the prevalence and rise in heart disease, right? Think about all the cancers, autoimmune conditions. 40 years ago, we had something like 30 known autoimmune conditions. Now we have like 120. We've created new diseases for us to deal with, right? And all of these conditions are now affecting people at a younger and younger age. Yeah. You look at, 13-year-olds being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, right? Of normal body weight. You look at 22-year-old men being diagnosed with low testosterone. You look at the rates of infertility in our population. All of that is because of this continuous loss in functionality and capability in our microbiome, right? So that was a big aside just to imprint that point, because for your kids and for you as well, it becomes extremely important to focus on alpha diversity, maintaining and growing that diversity within your microbiome. There's a number of ways you can do it, which is fantastic. And that's the good news about all this, right? Is that you can change this. So for one, you can diversify your diet, right? So the more diverse our diet is, the more diverse our microbiome tends to be. Early humans consumed upwards of 600 different types of foods annually, right? They hunted, they gathered, they foraged, they dug for roots and tubers. They ate all kinds of stuff. We eat like 15 different foods, right? So it's no surprise our diversity is shrinking quite dramatically. Mm-hmm. So we want to increase our diversity as much as we can. And I totally get it that it's very hard with kids. I have kids of my own, a 9-year-old and 11-year-old, and it's so hard to get them to eat anything that's good for them in any way. But we find ways of adding 1, maybe 2 new things to their diet each week, right? Doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be a large amount. If you can go to I always encourage people to go to an ethnic grocery store, for example, right? An Asian market or Middle Eastern market in your local area, you'll find vegetables or fruits or roots and tubers that are slightly different. And because of their different molecular structure, they feed different bacteria. So add one of those into one of your meals a week, right? And make that an ongoing thing and maintain the thing you added. By the end of the year, you would have added somewhere around 50 new items into your diet, and it'll have a profound impact on the diversity of your gut microbiome. The second thing is getting in more fiber and oligosaccharides, right? So fiber, lots of fiber-rich foods out there, both soluble and insoluble fiber. Find the ones that you tolerate well, whether it's psyllium husk or, whatever it may be. But we do the oligosaccharides because they're so incredibly powerful at increasing the growth of keystone species. And these are really important organisms that maintain the microbial structure within your gut. So we have a product called Mega Pre, which I'm sure, Dana, you're familiar with, that is designed to increase the diversity within your microbiome and feed those keystone species. The other thing you can do is start to reduce the amount of cleaners that you're using in your household, right? Most of your house does not need to be sterilized. Most surfaces, including most of your floor, does not have to be spick and span, sterile, clean, where 99.9% of all germs have been killed, right? So we're brainwashed to think that that means clean, when actually it doesn't. And there's lots of studies that I could elaborate on that have demonstrated this. Yes. But basically, households that use less chlorine-based sanitizers have kids with healthier outcomes, with the immune outcomes, asthma, allergies, viral infections, and all that, right? So most of the surfaces in my home are cleaned with water and maybe a couple drops of essential oil for some smell. And then there's certain areas, like if you bring home raw chicken and you get chicken juice on your counter, by all means, sterilize it, right? Use a wipe to clean it, or your toilet if you need to clean it once in a while with a sterile solution, that's fine. But most surfaces you don't need to. Another thing is getting outside. So being prescriptive about getting outside with your family, especially if you have little kids, right? And I don't just mean going for walks up and down your sidewalk and all these manicured lawns that likely have, pesticides and herbicides on it and right. And all these chemicals on it. I mean, actually going out to kind of untouched natural areas. For us, near me, we have lots of forest preserves, which are fantastic, right? So just going for walks in a forest preserve, if you're near the coast, go to the beach and let the kids get in the dirt. And here's an extra tip to just get more of the environment in you. When we go out with my kids, we like to ride our bikes to the forest preserve area. Then we get out and we throw rocks into the rivers and streams. And, I like them touching things out there, right? I want them to touch the texture of different trees and rocks and picking up things off the ground. All of that is very natural function that we've done for millions of years that gains us exposure to all of these environmental bacteria. But here's the extra tip upon that. At some point in that outing, bust out a sandwich or fruit or something that you would eat, right? With your hands, because that action of eating in the environment actually gains you more exposure to the microbes in the environment, right? Don't sanitize your hands with sanitizer before that. Just break out the food and the sandwich and have them open it and eat it and enjoy it as a family. Doing that in a prescriptive way where you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm prescribing to me and my family 2 or 3 times a week, 30, 40 minutes at a time, right? And be pretty disciplined about it, because you cannot overstate the importance of that kind of exposure. Getting a dog also dramatically increases the diversity in your home biome, which helps kids' immune systems and actually helps you live longer. So that's another tip. And of course, the Megaspore are spore-based probiotics. We've published studies showing that we increase the diversity of the microbiome. We increase keystone species as well. And then, of course, we seal that leakiness in the gut, which is at the root cause of many of these things. So those are all things you can kind of put together and combine to improve your alpha diversity within your gut microbiome. And if you just start doing those things, and then you're working with the practitioner like Dana, and you're understanding what your microbiome looks like, and you're making other changes to adjust the things that are a bit off in your microbiome, whether it's dietary or lifestyle changes, just adding all of those things together will have a dramatic cumulative effect, right? And that's another point to put across, is that there isn't like a magic bullet when it comes to your microbiome, right? Remember, it's a complex ecosystem. So there has to be a number of inputs that go in to help it improve, right? So you have to do a number of things. And over time, those number of things will accumulate to big changes, not only in your microbiome, but of course in your health. And so you have all of the power within you to make those changes and do those things.
Wow, I'm blown away right now. I mean, what you've just dropped there is like so much gold. It's amazing. I'm sure the listeners are just like frantically writing down everything that you have shared. I'm just going to ask one more question.
Yeah.
And that is, you mentioned probiotics, just like stool tests, are they all made equal?
Unfortunately, no. And I would venture to say, and this is with very good reason over the last 15 years, that the vast majority of probiotics that people have access to do absolutely nothing. If you're going to the stores, the big box stores, and you're spending $20, $19, $30 on a probiotic, and it's got 15 strains and 10 billion CFUs, in all likelihood, there's 99% chance that there's zero studies behind that product, and that there's zero validation that they work, right? And keep in mind that probiotics are made up of bacteria, and bacteria are biological entities that are quite complex. And so from one bacteria to another, even if they're the same species, because there are different subspecies, it can completely change how they function, and how they function in another complex environment, which is your gut. Most probiotics that you find on the shelf and you can buy online don't even survive through the gastric system, right? The gastric system, your stomach, and your stomach acid, your bile salts, and your small intestine are all designed to kill bacteria. And so most of the probiotics that you consume will end up being dead anyway before they ever get to the intestines. But any of them that do survive, unless they have been clinically researched to understand what they do in your system, you really have no idea what the impact is. And again, and this is part of the reason why we work with healthcare practitioners, right? Because healthcare practitioners have the background knowledge, and they spend the time vetting different products and the research behind it. So if you're out there just buying whatever you're buying at the health food store or the big box store or the pharmacy, in all likelihood, you're getting something that is not at all functioning in your system, right? So work with your healthcare practitioner and figure out which probiotic has worked for them in their practice as they're clinically observing their patients. They've probably read the studies as well, but that's where you should invest your money.
Yeah, I like to call it, you'll just end up with some expensive poop when you buy not very good probiotics, because that's what will happen. It just ends up in the toilet. Anyway, on that note, probably not a good place to stop, but Kiran, like, honestly, this has been amazing. I mean, your knowledge, your passion, it just comes through and it just shines. You definitely know your stuff, and I appreciate so much you sharing your knowledge and your experience with all of our listeners today. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dana, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. One more message before I give them that info is with parents, right? So obviously, mostly you work with parents who are working on their kids. It's equally important for you to take care of yourself as it is all the attention and focus you put on your kids, right? And I'll tell you why. Because there is something called like a microbiome cloud around your home, your family, and all that. And there are studies that show, and there's some fascinating studies on antibiotic use, for example, that show then where one individual in the household is taking an antibiotic, for example, and that antibiotic is disrupting their microbiome, a very similar and measurable disruption occurs in other people in that household who are not taking the antibiotic, right? This is a published study out of Johns Hopkins that demonstrated this. And that's because we all share a biome within our households. And so if you are not focused on yourself as equally, and all your efforts on your kids, and you're ensuring they get the best of everything, if your biome isn't healthy, you're setting their biome back, right? So it takes a whole household, it takes a family. So when you're working with your practitioners and you're considering products and changes and all that, do it for yourself as much as you're doing it for your kids. That'll help both of you. So in terms of where to reach me, I really try to engage with people as much as I can on social media. So reach out on Instagram. My handle, I think, is Kiran Biome. So KIRAN BIOME. On Facebook, we just put in my name, Kiran Krishnan, you'll find me. And then come to our website at microbiomelabs.com. We have lots of resources on there. You can also throw my name into Google or YouTube. You'll find, hundreds of videos and on different presentations of different things. There's a lot of learning out there. Obviously, not just from me, but lots of other people who are putting it out there. But do it. Learn from programs like this so you can empower yourself, and you absolutely have control of your outcomes. So there's a lot of positive hope out there for people.
Wow. All I can say is wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much again. I just thoroughly appreciate you showing up today and just sharing that with our listeners. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.